Let's go back to our top story now. The leaked email obtained by Sky News revealing that the Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, and the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, decided that the government could drop two of the climate asks, including temperature goals, from the text of a UK-Australia trade agreement. With an economy still reliant on coal, Australia is one of the world's largest carbon emitters per capita. But its Conservative government has said tougher action on fossil fuel emissions would cost jobs. It's one of the only of few of developed countries to have resisted setting a target of net zero emissions by 2050. The country has warmed on average by 1.4 degrees Celsius since national records began in 1910, leading to an increase in extreme heat events and wildfires. And joining me now is Tom Burke, who's chairman of the climate change think tank, E3G, and former government advisor on climate change. Tom, thanks so much for talking to us. How normal is it for climate commitments to be included in deals like this?
This kind of trade deal is quite a normal thing to agree these kind of conditions on trade. That's what trade agreements are all about. What's really extraordinary about this story is what an own goal it is. I mean, this is really putting a nasty stain on Britain's otherwise legitimate claim to be a climate change leader. We've really done more than most of the world to show that you can decarbonize your economy and still grow it. And here we are giving up our effort to get other countries to go along with us. So I think that undermines the Prime Minister's as the host of the COP in Glasgow later this year. And it really does let one of the worst performers amongst all of the developed countries off the hook. So it's a very bad decision, I think, by our governments.
Well, the argument is that the treaty text is going to contain a reference to Paris, but without the specific temperature commitments. Isn't that enough?
No, that just means you've got mealy-mouthed words instead of accountable figures that you can actually check and see whether they're doing it. So you're replacing concrete commitments with empty words, and I think that simply doesn't do the job for you.
But if the Paris commitments are to cut temperatures, then if you're agreeing to stick to the Paris Accord, why do you need that text?
You need a specific agreement in the Paris Accord is that you reduce your temperatures. You do your best to reduce global temperature by 2 degrees or well below 2 degrees is the exact wording it, and 1.5 if possible. There's no way that what Australia is doing can be seen to be on track with that. And actually, that means they will be, if they don't change policy very dramatically, in breach of their Paris commitments. Now, we shouldn't endorse that by agreeing to a trade agreement with them that lets them off that hook. And remember, British farmers will be required to work and change agriculture to agree with those sort of targets. And we're letting the Australian farmers not be required to do that. Now, how is that good for our trade relations?
Because our deal with the EU does include that it gets suspended if we don't stick to...
Yeah, we're required by our deal with the EU to stick to those commitments, but we're now entering into a free trade agreement with Australia where they won't be required to stick to those agreements, which is why we put them in the original draft of the agreement, because we were going to have to stick to them, and why it's completely inexplicable that we've now let Australia off the hook. And we're doing significant damage, in a sense, to our efforts to deal with climate change. To get what? I mean, there's practically invisible benefits to the economy for doing this. So all one can see coming out of it is a headline about having got an agreement with Australia. Well, that's pretty empty success.
What is it about Australia that makes it so reticent to deal with climate change?
I think two things, really. I think that there is a very conservative government that simply sees the level of government action that's required to deal with climate change as politically unacceptable. And there is a very strong Murdoch-dominated media that supports that government, which is a real paradox in a country which has the best solar you could possibly imagine. And where around the actual country, people are doing extraordinary things to use renewables, and which is also, as your package pointed out, one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, both because of drought, because of fires, and we've seen really dramatic pictures of that impacting on Australia already. So it's very hard to see why we would support and go along with that kind of government.
Just briefly, Tom, couldn't you look at this and say, well, actually, this is a step in the right direction, because Australia, in all of their deals, they've never even referenced the Paris Accord?
I think exactly what we want them to do is to take them seriously as, take Paris seriously as an issue, step up to the plate and do what they're committed to. And we should not be allowing any country to avoid its commitments by somehow covering up the really concrete commitments with mealy-mouthed words and empty promises from politicians. In the level of anxiety the public is now feeling about the state of the climate, that really is going to be very bad news for politicians everywhere. We don't look as if we're not serious about tackling this problem.
Okay, Tom, thank you.